I made a fighting game, but you can't fight back. Usually in fighting games, they give you the same abilities as the enemies to make it a fair fight. But in my game, you don't have any real attacks. All you can do is push the enemies around and make them knock each other out. Stay to the end because this game turns out to be really funny. So I wanted this to be a cartoon style ninja fighting game, and I started by creating this ninja that you are going to be playing as. I decided to make him look scared because he isn't going to be able to fight back against the other ninjas. Then I switched his colors to blue and I added him into Unity, and then after that I got some basic controls set up for him. As the ninja, you'll be able to walk around, jump, and when you are in the air you'll be able to slam down onto the ground. I wanted this to be a very stylized game, so the next thing I did was add juice to make the game feel good. I created some animations for the player, and I also added some stretching and squishing for when he's jumping and slamming on the ground, and then finally I set up this particle effect for when he hits the ground to show the impact that it has. Then, before working on the enemies, I wanted the game to look a little bit better, so I created the environment. I started by creating this blue and white gradient background, and then I created this wood texture that's going to be on the ground and the walls. And finally, I created my favorite part of the map, the clouds, which I took inspiration from these Japanese cloud drawings. And then I gave them an animation to flow back and forth to make it feel less static. Now that we have the map and player, I feel like this game is really starting to have a good stylized look. Next, we need the enemies. To start, I just took the same sprite for the player and I colored it red to show it's an enemy. Now, I bet you've been wondering how you can actually win if you can't fight. Here's my plan. You'll be able to slam on the ground and that'll push the enemies into each other, and if you time it right, they'll knock each other out. So to implement this into my game, the first thing I wanted to do was make the knockback work. I made it so if you ground pound close enough to an enemy, it would knock him away from you. After that, I made it so it will always be slowly walking towards you, and I gave it a walking animation that's similar to the player's. I also made it flip over when it gets knocked away, which will come in handy later. Next, we need some attacks for the enemy. Because I didn't want to have to try and animate the enemies, I created this fist sprite for them, and this took me way too long to do, but I eventually got it looking good enough, and I added it to my game. I made it a child of the enemy, and then I played around with giving it a trail to make it stand out. Then I set it up so when it gets close enough to you, it'll start swinging its fist. Then I added some other enemies to test it out, and I created this death animation for them, and now when an enemy hits another one, it'll get launched up into the air. This turns out to be way better than I thought it would, and I love how funny it looks when you knock an enemy out into another one and it just flops over. Then I added a punch sound effect and a white particle cloud to add to the impact to make it more satisfying. After I'd played around with that for a while, it was really fun, but it got boring quickly, so I decided I needed more enemies. I created this enemy with green colors, and then I also made a throwing star for him to throw at you. Then I added him into my game, and I set up an animation for his star to spin when he throws it. The way this enemy will work is very similar to the other enemy. He will wait until he's close enough to you, and then on a random timer, he'll jump up into the air and throw a star at you. You'll be able to dodge a star, and it'll take out other ninjas if you time it right. Then I decided to test it out with some enemies for variety, and it's actually feeling really good. Up to this point, you didn't have any health, and you could just take as many hits as you wanted to, so that was the next thing I wanted to add. I created this health bar with some basic colors, and then I went to test it out, and it looked a little out of place. So I used these Ninja Dojo pictures I had laying around, and I put them on either side, and now it fits in a little bit better. The last thing I did for your health was make it so an oof sound effect plays whenever you get hit, and this turned out to be way funnier than I thought. Also, up to this point, I had just been putting enemies down manually, so the next thing I did was make it so every time you kill a ninja, another one would spawn in a random position. This kinda makes it look like they're just flying out of the sky, but I think it adds to the effect. Now, I really liked how everything was looking, and even how it was working, but there was one big issue. The game was way too hard. I tested it out a few more times, and I got some ideas for how to make it better. My first idea was a wider slam distance. This made it a little bit better because you could hit enemies from further away, but it was still a little too harsh. The next thing I did was make it so you slowly regenerate health over time. This was a really simple solution, but it made it so you'll be able to run away and get your health back, and it would also make the end games much more intense. The last thing I did was find this ninja font, and I created the score counter that goes up with time, and the longer you stay alive, the higher your score will get. Finally, to top it off, I created this scroll and a game over screen that'll show up when you run out of health, and it'll let you restart. So, that's how I made a fighting game, but you can't fight back. When I originally set out to make this game, I didn't know how well the main mechanic was going to work, but now that's actually a game I love it. I left a link in the description, so if you want to go try it out, go ahead. If you enjoyed this video, go check out how I made a fishing game, but you're the fish.